Welcome, 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 everyone, to another episode of the Option Menu Crew podcast. Today is episode 22, and today we're going to be talking about controllers. With you today is your typical host, me, Ryan. With us today also is Ed.
Ooh, I can't wait to hear what you have to say about controllers, Ryan.
I know you've been hearing me rant about controllers for a while. And then we also have Mike with us today. How you doing, Mike?
I'm good. How's everyone doing?
Mike has some
Good.
interesting opinions on controllers. So, yeah, this is something we've been tossing around, and as we've just, whenever we're like playing games and stuff and together and just uh, chewing the fat, we eventually talk about controllers, and controllers have been in the news a lot lately, thanks to the rampant problems with the Joy-Con drift and also DualSense 5 having bad uh, joystick issues now, and that being a newer console with an expensive controller that's about $70 a pop for them, and not really any third-party solutions at this time. It's a huge problem. So we would just I've been wanting to get into not just specifically the issues that there has been with the controllers, but just talking about controllers in general, about our favorite styles of controllers, what we like, the gimmicks and features that have been there throughout the years, and just kind of in general go over our thoughts and feelings and see where we'd like controllers to go in the future, as a lot of recent news with the Joy-Con drift and stuff like that has brought up many different thoughts and feelings from different places. So I've formed an opinion based on a lot of that new information and some of my new experiences. I'll recap a story that I had. I don't remember if I actually told it on the podcast about my PS4 DualShock 4 controller debacle. Um, but yeah, right now I play with just about every type of controller. I have a PlayStation 5. I have a PC, but I buy Xbox controllers for that, and then I have the Switch, and I have three sets of the traditional Joy-Cons, one traditional or regular PlayStation Nintendo Pro controller, and then I have a Power A uh, third-party Switch Pro controller that is wired only. Or no, it's not Power A, it's PDP. So apologies for that. It has swappable face plates. It's wired only. It doesn't have gyro. It doesn't have rumble. Doesn't have NFC. But it does have two extra back paddles. So right now, my favorite controller is the Xbox Series, the new controller. And the reason why is that it gets everything right. And to me, most importantly, especially because of how much I play fighting games, the D-pad is phenomenal the way they evolved it. So I think a lot of other controllers are pretty good, and I'll be getting into some of the other specifics in my experiences with different control schemes, as we all will on the episode. But I'm going to toss it to Ed, and he can give us his overview on current thoughts of modern video game controllers.
Yeah, Ryan, you have more issues with controllers than anyone I've ever met, but I guess that really shows that you do care, so that's probably a good thing. I can't recall ever having any issues with the controllers. I mean, I'm not too picky, but I have not been too happy with the controllers on the Switch. I'm sure most people have had issues with Joy-Con drift, and I've had drift on the Pro controller, so I've had to replace both of those. So that's been a little frustrating. Um, I I mean, before I had the Switch, I didn't have the GameCube or anything earlier than that for Nintendo, so I can't really say anything about those controllers. I've used the GameCube controller before, but really it's just been Switch and mostly PlayStation. And DualShock 4 is what I'm using right now, and that's probably the best controller I've ever used. I really like it. So I have my preferences, but certainly I'm usually okay with the controller. But I think it would be hard to go back to the old PlayStation controllers. They're definitely not as ergonomic.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's like you don't really know how much better it could be until you use a new controller and you're like, wow, that old controller was not good.
Yeah, on that point, I feel like when it comes to the ergonomics of like the older controllers to the newer controllers, I think we have a lot of nostalgia that clouds just how poorly ergonomic the older controllers were. Um, and even like Nintendo 64 was oddly shaped, but I'd say it was still kind of it was ergonomic if when you're using just two handles at a time, but like trying to have to switch between the D-pad position and the control stick position was a weird thing that was just kind of like it was like a short-sighted first time like, well, how do we do this? Well, we don't expect people to use it at the same time. They just didn't think about that like, oh, the D-pad could eventually be a second set of buttons or an additional set of buttons instead of just being an alternate control scheme for some games. So, yeah, I think definitely when it comes to like ergonomics, that's probably where I'd say is evolved the most. Um, and I know how you feel about the Joy Cons. Like they're too small in general, and that's why there's so many accessories for uh, making them fit in your hands.
Yeah, I have a grip for my Switch, and even that is not perfect. It's just not. They're not my favorite controller.
So what
They're
is
clever. They're clever, but they're
so
not.
DualShock 4s currently, or like you'd say
I'd
is like
say
your
so.
favorite?
Though I've used the DualSense at when I don't have the PS5 yet, but I've used the DualSense at one of my friends' house. I've been impressed. I like the new features in it. It is. I think you mentioned that you felt it was a little big, and I might have
For
to
me at least.
I might have to agree with you on that, but it's something I could get used to. But the DualShock 4 just fits in my hand very well. Although
I agree.
that the touchpad and the light bar are kind of silly.
Yeah.
It really comes down to it. There's no perfect controller.
No,
and
there isn't.
this is like me with everything. I feel like I just hold out hoping I'm gonna find the perfect something in whatever category, and everything's gonna have some sort of flaw. And I wish everything was perfect, but
You have to find the perfect controller. You have to create it. Create the perfect controller.
I probably, yeah. I mean, maybe that's what we all need to get together and design a controller and put it on Kickstarter, right?
Well, we can start here on this podcast, and I think we'll get to that towards the end of the episode there. But that's a perfect segue. So, Mike, your
Yes.
experience with controllers, what have you liked over the ages, and where are you currently on your favorite?
So originally, I started with like the DualShock 2 and the PlayStation 2.
Mhm.
And then I got the N64 controller, and that one was like, a lot different from anything I ever used before.
Mhm.
And then throughout the years, like I've used, a whole bunch of different controllers, and even like at my grandparents, we took out the old Atari, and we were using the Atari controllers, the paddle,
Yeah.
the paddle controller, and the arcade controller, obviously.
Yeah, the Atari had like 6 different types of controllers that were like standard.
Yeah, yeah, those were interesting controllers. But I'm not really like that picky on controllers all that much. But I would say either the DualShock 4 or the Xbox One controller is my favorite controller, but I have a hard time like deciding which. For a long time, it was Xbox One controller, just because it was like bigger and it felt better to me. But like, recently I've used the DualShock 4 more, and it really feels comfortable. So I don't know. I have a hard time deciding between the two, which is the best.
Mhm.
For me, I mean, I don't have any of those fancy like $200 controllers, so I can't really say to that.
Okay. Yeah, and so I think what we'll do is we'll get into some standards here because controllers are very personal, and a lot of it has to do with hands and types like that. And a quick shout out to the Microsoft Adaptive Controller that allows for a lot of disabled people to customize the controller experience as necessary. There's a lot of DIY and like custom made stuff out there for them, and for Microsoft to actually create like an official um, modding solution to put out at least for Xbox consoles and PC, and making that somewhat simpler for that demographic is fantastic. And hopefully, in the future, Sony and Nintendo will eventually do something like that, or even just allow Microsoft to put their adaptive controllers on there with some firmware or maybe an adapter or something like that, and make it a lot simpler. So then they don't even have to do that, and they just at least comply a little bit. But like for non-disabled users here, it starts with our hands. I would describe my hands as like big but lanky. Like they're not fat. I don't have fat hands, or thick hands, and because I'm not trying to offend anyone, but that's the thing. I've had this weird like I don't really need big controllers, and a lot of people I've heard a lot of people go like, oh, this controller's so small, or it's cramping my hands. And I'm like, even the Joy Cons, like it's not super uncomfortable to use the Joy Cons. I can get my hands around it pretty easily. Um, but certain controllers, when they get to the bigger side, that's where my hand starts to hurt or gets uncomfortable. Even though I have long fingers, I've actually preferred smaller controllers, and so I know I'm a weirdo in that regard. The DualShock 4, I'm with you, Ed. DualShock 4 I actually think is the most comfortable controller for me that I've ever used. The only thing I didn't like, and this is going to be like my main point, was the D-pad. I wish the D-pad was better, and I'll get into that. But I thought the handles were great, the sticks were great. I really don't care between the symmetrical PlayStation style design or the Microsoft offset style design. The face buttons feel good enough, and the triggers and bumpers felt perfectly on point. And then the other features, whatever. But I definitely felt that the DualShock 4 is still probably ergonomically the best for me. Although the new Xbox Series controller feels fine. I really don't have an issue with any of its ergonomics either.
The Xbox One had a better D-pad, right?
Than
the DualShock 4, don't you think, or no?
Gen 1 of the Xbox One controller, I would say its D-pad was only slightly better, but it was like too stiff. So from my perspective for like fighting games, like I couldn't really do my quarter circles and sweeping motions that easily. But then when they did the Gen 2, where they added the Bluetooth and the other jack for the for headphones, that's when they loosened it up a little bit, and it then felt really good. I still think it wasn't perfect, but it was way better than the mushy D-pad style for the standard DualShock 4. And I'll get into some of the other advancements there, but yeah. So that's where my hands are. So yeah, Mike, where do you feel your hands fall, and what's like been repeat again, what was the most comfortable controller for you so far?
I mean, my hands are not small; they're bigger. So I thought, for me, it's between the DualShock 4 and the Xbox One controller as far as like my favorite to use, with being comfortable and all that. But I don't mind the Switch Pro. I mean, it's a little behind because it doesn't have the like feedback for the bumpers. Like
You
the
mean the
PS4.
analog triggers?
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't have the same feedback.
Yeah.
So it's kind of behind in that sense, but it was like Nintendo was like the first one to like kind of revolutionize the controller, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah.
Over the
So
years,
it's
Nintendo's experimented the most.
Funny that they're kind of, well, not really behind, but they have like a different, they do different kind of things. They tried the Wiimote, they tried the GameCube, was a lot different, and so was the N64. I think the Pro controller is more like a standard controller.
Yeah.
Than anything else.
I think in my hand, the Pro controller, the Switch regular Pro controller does actually feel pretty good, like handle-wise. I think that's a good size. The handles fit well. My thumbs and fingers land in the right places. So yeah, I really don't have an issue with the ergonomics of that either. Ed, what about you? What's been what's been the most ergonomic for you, and where you feel like your hands fall in terms of size?
I guess I never thought of my hands as small because I don't think I've ever had the complaint that it was too big. So, yeah, I don't know what's been a big controller for you. I guess like I don't think I mentioned the DualSense and I thought it was bigger, but I don't think it was too big. I mean, when I was using it, it's not like I felt like, oh, this is too big for my hands. I just noted it was a little bigger than the DualShock 4. But I don't think I would call it too big. But really, it's been the DualShock 4 is probably the best one for me. If I went back to the PS3 controller recently, the DualShock 3, just because I was going to play a game, but that controller is so small, I almost didn't even want to play the game. It's not, I guess it's not that small, but because it's small and it's just like not as fitted to your hands.
Yeah.
I think the pro controller for the Switch is pretty good. I haven't used an Xbox controller a while, but I don't remember having any complaints about that.
Hmm.
So size wise, I mean, what's a really giant controller? The only one I can think of, which I never used, was like the original Xbox controller, but nothing's been that big since. Has there been?
The first gen original Xbox controller, no, there hasn't really been another. Well, okay, the Dreamcast controller was also kind of a thick boy, and then I mean, the N64 controller was what it was with that three-prong approach. So it's
Yeah.
big, but like per handle, it didn't feel huge. Um,
Yeah.
I was thinking about it a lot, and I was just trying to compare it. And you guys can see me, but the audience can't. I was trying to figure out like what is it about it, and with the DualShock, I think it has to do with the handles being, and these aren't necessarily bad things. I'm just saying for my personal ergonomics, the handles are a little bit thicker and a little bit longer, and I feel like I'm stretching my fingers a lot more to get them around the, uh, even though they don't. It's weird. Like part of it doesn't, but then when I play for long periods of time, it feels like it puts more strain on my hands for reaching the shoulders and the triggers, and you have to use them a lot for most modern games. So that's where it doesn't seem like when I first originally put it in my hands, it didn't feel like it was going to be off. But then I was using it, it just seemed to strain my hands a lot more than like the DualShock 4. So I think it being I guess I would describe it as a taller controller is where it did it because it is taller than the DualShock 4 when I stand them up. And it's not even much, but your hands only need I guess so much a little bit to actually be thrown off. Yeah, so that seems to be the thing for me, and that's where I say like the lankiness. It seems like the longer controller would be nice, but I don't know. Maybe it's just also muscle memory. My muscles are used to the smaller controllers. Wrapping my hands around the original NES and the Super Nintendo controllers back then,
Yeah, I wouldn't want to use those these days.
or like you were saying, and that's another point I wanted to touch on is the history of the three consoles and their like standard controllers.
But a lot of times, like, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say a lot of times controllers are designed for like smaller hands. For like the Joy-Con, like they're designed to be used by smaller hands, either by
for children. Like Nintendo almost designs their consoles for children's hands because they want to make sure children can play them. But Xbox is not thinking like, how can I make this controller small enough for my 8-year-old to play it?
And Nintendo's trying to find that balance.
The NES, right? The NES and SNES, like those were originally designed for a younger audience. I mean, anyone.
Yeah, I recently tried to use a Game Boy Advance again, and that thing is just so small. I mean, I hold it and like my fingers are like interlocking behind it. It's so small.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I almost think controllers may have gotten bigger over the years just because it's more expected that adults are going to be playing video games, so they have to design them with that audience in mind.
Yeah,
like
and in addition, like the Sony and the PlayStation, and of course we had Sega Genesis before Xbox came in and took over, and Sega stopped making consoles. It was predominantly an Asian market, so the first and foremost people were the Asian market, and their hands are on average smaller than ours. So that's there. Plus, video games were seen as a more of a child's toy, and now there's more. Kids have grown up into us, and we're adults now. So that market has gotten bigger, and these manufacturers are trying to find that sweet spot between is this big enough for a kid, or is this small enough for a kid, but also big enough for an adult. And that's why also we've gotten much better third-party options over the time. But the standard controller is still, at least as far as we can tell, the best thing. Even the third-party controllers, you have to go really expensive for them to be like feature complete on top of being a decent quality and build quality. Whereas the standard controllers are still like price per value.
Yeah, sometimes third-party controllers are really what you need. I remember when I had the PS2, I got this Logitech wireless controller that was really awesome, and it was much more comfortable. It was wireless. It had rumble and long battery life like that. I don't remember specifically what it was called, but that thing made my enjoyment of the PS2 just so much more. That is another innovation that like I cannot use a wire. I would never want to use a wired controller again. That's just such a downgrade from what I'm used to with everything being wireless. I think the only thing I can think of recently that had wired controllers were all those classic consoles from Nintendo and Sony, like the Super Nintendo Classic and the PS Classic. Like those, I mean, they shipped with wired controllers. I guess they wanted to make you feel like you were in the '90s, but I don't want to go back to that.
Those devices were all about cashing in on the nostalgia, and people get really picky about nostalgia. Like some people even love the old jaggy resolution because it's like, no, it looks more like how it was, so that triggers it more. So cords and
Yeah.
being like only 4 feet away from your television, which and to some extent that's probably the one part where I feel I can resonate with, but I wouldn't be doing
But
that
the
anymore.
cords were even shorter. They were even shorter than the original.
It's true. That's true.
Like
Yeah, it's so
it's
weird.
like, well, I guess
It's like they scaled
designed
it.
to.
I don't know.
It's so they could sell you the extension cord.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that's true. I do have the extension cord.
There you go.
They got
Prove it
you.
right
Yeah.
there. Although those that's USB, right?
No, not the. It's proprietary for Nintendo. It's
Okay.
it's the same as the virtual controller, so you can use a virtual controller.
Gotcha.
So I guess that's like another option. But for PlayStation, it was USB.
Okay. I was gonna say for USB, if you're using it at a desk, like with the USB, it'd be the PC, and you could do that on your desk. So that wouldn't be too
Yeah, I have-
absurd to have like a
I have
3 foot cord.
both mine like on my desk, so it's just like it doesn't matter.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, so do you guys have a thought on like how you alluded a little bit to it, like Xbox kind of iterated on its controller. The Duke was of course like a huge controller that was kind of a continuation of what was going on with the Dreamcast controller, and then they refined it to the 360. 360 controller is super popular, and then the uh, Xbox One and Xbox Series controller are essentially just refinements of those to where we've gotten today, and I think that's been very successful. Though they haven't been too adventurous. The Duke was actually the most adventurous one because it had the 4-face buttons plus the black and white buttons that were like extra on there. And then they used to have the memory card packs, which they got rid of because everything moved to hard drives. And then Nintendo, as we know, has been super adventurous, and just about every controller is wildly different. They've been pioneering the controller space in a lot of ways, for better or worse. And then Sony has kind of been a little bit in the middle, where they pioneered the dual analog stick, but then they had like a key design. They didn't really change the designs of the controllers all the much until like PlayStation 4, where it was essentially a reshaped shell, but the core of the soul of the system was there. They added the touchpad, which was wild. They added the light bar, which was a misguided consideration for the eventual VR headset, and then DualShock 5, once again, kind of like an evolution of what they were doing there, and with new features and gimmicks added there. What would you guys say about that? Like, do you prefer Nintendo's wildly different controller types, or are you more comfortable with like those softer iterations of like Xbox and PlayStation?
Well, before we go on that, I just wanted to point out that the PlayStation 4 also added the share button, which I think is something notable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yep.
that's a feature that a lot of people use. I mean, I'm not big on taking screenshots or videos, but I mean, my sister does that enough to where like she got a new game for Christmas and she's like, "Oh, I can't even install this game because I have tens of gigabytes of screenshots and videos." So,
Oh man.
that's
Wow.
that's a big feature that people use. I think that's notable, and enough that Nintendo added a similar feature to the Switch.
It's true. It's true.
But as far as what approach I prefer, I do like the Nintendo try something new. I'd say the Wii controller ranks up there for me just because I think it's pretty comfortable. It's simple. I kind of like that. I kind of like the ergonomics of a remote, and I like the nunchuck. The only thing that would be nicer about that is if they were not wired together, but that's a limitation I can deal with. And I do like that Sony tries new things. Like I do like I'm really impressed with the adaptive triggers on the DualSense, and the haptics is a good thing. I mean, the haptics were nice on the Switch, so I think that's something that it's kind of disappointing that Microsoft hasn't done that yet, but they might. I think they put out a survey on Twitter where they were asking people like, do you want something like this? So I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft just went back to the drawing board and made that as an option. And that would be good because that would give more incentive for developers to put more controller, use those controller features if they would also be used by, or similar things could be used by people on Xbox. So I think refinement is good, but I do appreciate that Sony and Nintendo are trying new things. But it is good that Xbox kind of has a design and they found something that works. And sometimes Nintendo's controllers just do not resonate with me.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Mike?
The Joy-Con, like the Joy-Con.
And Mike, what about you?
I think it's good that Nintendo innovates, but it's also important for them to have like that option, like the optional Pro controller as well. I think they can do both. I mean, I guess people might get mad because they have to pay more, but I think you can still innovate and offer an option that everyone agrees is like a standard, especially for like, games that you don't want to play with like waggle or like motion control or
do you remember playing like Twilight Princess where on the Wii where like to attack you had to like shake the controller and that was the only way to do it?
I loved everything about Twilight Princess on Wii except that. That was the one thing I was not a fan of.
There was like bow training or something for Zelda, wasn't there?
They did a crossbow training like side game for that extra, and it was just a plastic shell. Like it's to call it like an adapter or something. Like it wasn't even like a new controller. They came up with a bunch of plastic shells to put the Wii remote in, which I guess when you got something that ain't broke, you just put stuff on it.
But I mean, people laughed at Nintendo at the time, but look at everything in VR.
Oh, your sound. Got to be careful. Your sound's been cutting out a bit.
Everything in VR has been, everyone's doing motion control in VR, so Nintendo was just ahead of their time.
Yeah, and that's a point I think is worthwhile mentioning is that there should be some experimentation with controllers and trying to work in features and figuring out what really adds to the experience. And I don't know if the best way to do that is through the first party or with the third party, but I guess it has to. What I've come to understand is it's not worthwhile to do if it's not standardized in the first party controller, because if you don't have it always there, standardized in the controller, third party companies are far less likely to try and utilize it at all. And it even sucks between the different platforms how different they can be, because then third party games are far less likely to even try to do that. Like you've got the adaptive triggers on PlayStation, you have the HD rumble of the Switch, but while they're kind of similar, like the haptic and rumble and stuff, like sure that's universal, so every game has that and plays with it, but those other unique features, unless it's like an exclusive, rarely get touched on. And then it's also which ones are actually really adding value and which ones are just these gimmicks that, well, we tried it. And of course, we were bringing up before, it can increase the cost of the controllers. So quick question there to the group is, where do you feel the comfortable price range for like a standard controller for a platform is for you? I think historically they're usually around like 40 to 50. And I think 50 is kind of like the sweet spot for a standard controller. And I think third party, you can go up, you can go down, because some are cheaper, some lack features. And even with the Switch, like the Switch Classic controller or Switch Pro controller has a bunch of features in it, and a lot of the third party controllers cut those features, even as basic ones like as rumble, all the way to just being wired. And so yeah, I think like 50 for the standard is good, and we've seen with the Xbox series and the PlayStation and with Nintendo's, the price creep up to 60 and 70 for the standard controllers. And I think that's just asking a little too much, even with all those features, because it's supposed to be the basic controller. It should be the most reliable, and we've even seen now like they're cutting corners and they are not upholding like the social contract. I don't know, with consumer trust for justifying those prices.
Yeah, they're just using cheap parts. Everything drifts now. I mean, there's lawsuits against Microsoft. There's suit against Sony. There's, we know of the one against Nintendo. It's just everything drifts. Drift is just like controllers are now just a consumable item, and it's frustrating. But
I eat controllers for breakfast.
yeah, if you play enough games, you might as well.
I think for a price point, like, yeah, 50 is good, but I mean, maybe with inflation, like, 50 to 60 with inflation. I don't know. I mean, I'm not economic analyst or anything.
Yeah, none of us are. Like as a consumer, we can just kind of say what we feel is fair, and I feel like 50 is still fair because that's practically the price of a new game at this point. And
yeah,
well, new games are going to be 70.
Yeah, they're going up now. We got that's a whole other podcast topic though. Yeah, and then of course there's like the pro controllers and stuff like that. So I know you guys haven't really bought any of the pro controllers, but have and when I say the pro, I'm not talking about like Switch's basic, Xbox style one. I'm talking about those like the Xbox Elite controller that came out, or for PlayStation, they've licensed to a couple different companies to create a pro instead of a Sony official in-house one. Have you guys had a chance to try any of those?
No, I can't justify spending over $100 on a controller.
I didn't know if you'd had like any friends or something that had them, because hopefully once we're all finished with getting vaccinated and hang out and stuff, you guys can get some hands on the one I have.
No, I haven't tried them.
I don't think I have.
Okay.
I don't think so. Yeah.
So the one I've played around with the Xbox Elite controller a little bit. I think the V1, and I wasn't sure how I felt about the extra buttons on the back at first, but then after getting a couple of the controllers and the extra buttons on like the back, the underside bumpers, it's much more common now, even in cheaper controllers, to add those extra buttons or so that feature I think has been worthwhile. And I know that's like a tricky tightrope to walk. Is just how many buttons can we have on a controller? But my favorite Elite style Pro, whatever you want to call it, is currently the Razer Raiju Ultimate for PlayStation 4. It's currently only sold in Europe, though you can get it imported from online websites. Why? I'm not really sure.
It's not region locked, is it? Like it's not like you can't use it with a North American 4.
No, it's not region locked at all. I did not have like a modified PlayStation 4 or an out of region PS4. It just plugged in, and I use it both for my PC and my PS4. I think it could technically work for PS4 games on my PS5 through backwards compatibility, but I couldn't use it for my PS5 games because that's just the way the standard is. Oh, I think I did try it, and it just it does have unique drivers, so I'm pretty sure it doesn't work on the PlayStation 5. But at the time, when I was using it between my PS4 and my PC, because my goal was to eventually just try and find a controller I could use between all my systems. I could get a dongle so I could use it on all that, but the more weird you get with controllers, the less likely you are to find compatible firmware, so that also gets tricky. But the reason I like the Razer Raiju Ultimate is for a number of reasons. First off, while it is PlayStation style, so I get that people are not going to like symmetrical sticks versus offset sticks. I don't care. I've played with both. I can completely switch between the two, and it really doesn't matter for me. The face buttons are mechanical, which is great. They have a nice satisfying audio click as well as a nice physical click to them. It feels very responsive, like I don't have to put too much pressure on them, and I definitely feel like I get the feedback I want. Bumpers, I don't think they would qualify as mechanical, but I'm not 100% sure. But they have a very short throw and doesn't have a ton of resistance, but it certainly doesn't like just tapping them isn't going to trigger them. It does feel like they're like you need to put a little bit of pressure. It feels like you can be deliberate. The triggers are definitely more Xbox style shaped. They feel like they have a shorter throw, but the same amount of resistance as like the 360 / the series or Gen 2 Xbox One controllers. The D-pad, the first like premium feature they have in there, and it does have a touchpad. It does have a touchpad that works. The D-pad can be swapped out for either a disc style that's more akin to like the Ultimate or the Xbox Elite controller. It doesn't have quite the pronounced disc or the etching in there. It's more like it has a small etching of a D-pad. I wish the D-pad etching was a little bit more raised, like the Series controller is. But it feels better than the 4-button separated version for that I can swap in. That it just they feel a little too stiff, but they do have that because of their stiffness, they do almost have a mechanical feeling. I don't know if once again if they actually qualify as mechanical. The analog sticks feel pretty good, but they actually feel kind of loose and like a little short on the draw. But for the level of play that I'm at when it comes to like first-person shooters or 3D games, it really doesn't matter. And you can swap the tops; they're just magnetically attached. And this controller did come with a taller version and a PlayStation version. Not a complete set. The full set is actually just the Xbox style impression one. Although it doesn't have it has like a slightly textured rubber, but not as pronounced as like you feel on the current Xbox controllers. And then the other thing that I've really fallen in love with that made it really ubiquitous was they have these inner shoulder buttons. So you've got your bumpers, you've got your triggers, your L1, R2, the L1, L2, R1, R2. But then there's they call them M1 and M2 for middle, which is kind of cute. And they're positioned just inside of the triggers and bumpers. And at first I thought that was going to be really awkward, like in a picture, it's hard to imagine. But for my fingers, like I said, with the lankiness, perfect. Like it runs right over the ridge, so easily swapping between pressing the triggers, the bumpers, or pressing in the middles with the actual tips of my index fingers is perfect. And those are definitely feel like mechanical, like just little clicks there, and they work perfectly. And then they also have 2 underside pads. Unlike the Elite, which has like longer lever style pads, these are like 2 big flat buttons, so plenty of room to get your middle fingers on there regardless like the size of your hands, and you can press in a multitude of different areas and it's going to register. It doesn't require a lot of pressure to do so, so it definitely feels very comfortable. It has a nice hefty bulk to it, so if you're a person who's sensitive to like the weight of the controller, it feels really comfortable in that regard to wrap your hands around. For me, it's a little heavy and my hands have cramped up over extended periods of play, but it's still really good if I'm using it like in first-person shooter mode, where I've assigned the face buttons to the 2 middle and the under bumpers, which is the main reason you get that kind of controller. I can play. I used it with the Halo Master Chief Collection on PC, and it was great. Like you have to mentally build up the muscle memory for using those buttons over the face buttons. But once you do, you never have to take your thumbs off the stick, except for some D-pad stuff, and even then, you're not doing that for anything critical. Most of your actions there are much better, and I've noticed it's been a lot more fun. And even with like just regular 3D games, I was playing Days Gone with this controller. It was so much more fun to not have to use the face buttons for stuff like that. It can be used wirelessly, which is nice, and there's a switch on the back so you can switch between the 3 modes. So you can do Bluetooth with PS4, which is one mode, Bluetooth with PC, which is another mode. Don't know why those have to be separate. It's probably just a firmware thing. And then USB mode, which I don't even know why you have to toggle into that, but that shuts off the signaling, and you just use the proprietary connector. It's micro USB connector, but it's got a custom fitted head for a really secure connection to the inside of the port there, and then a 10-foot braided cable with a breakaway point close to it. So that's pretty premium. All things considered, Razer tries to do premium. It's just been a little bit dubious in quality. And while it did cost me, I think, like about $250 for it, I totally don't regret it. I like it. I wish the D-pad was still a little bit better, but overall, I could use it for 90% of the games that I play. And I would highly recommend it to just about anyone who's interested. Oh, it's got this like nice textured rubber on the front. It's all matte finish, which is great, except for the face buttons. The face buttons and the D-pad are not matte. They're like the shiny plastic, which is weird, but whatever. And then the back has the texturing like you'd find on the Elite controller. So it does take inspiration. And Razer definitely is more of an Xbox style fan. I think the CEO or something of the company has said on a couple interviews that he's like, yeah, we make mostly Xbox things because I play Xbox and also a lot of people play Xbox, so why wouldn't we? And they've slowly branched out into more PlayStation style stuff. Um, and I'm looking for not a controller. I don't want just a dedicated controller just for fighting games. If I could totally do that. I'm not an arcade stick fan. I played in the arcades, but I didn't really grow up learning fighting games in the arcade. I learned them at home, playing them on PlayStation and controllers or Super Nintendo, I should say, because I Street Fighter 2 all the way back on Super Nintendo. Um, so that's where like D-pad and stuff means more to me than learning arcade sticks. And then they do make like those custom ones that have like better D-pads and the 6 face buttons, but I don't want to have just a controller for fighting games and then a controller for all that because that's not the standard. That's not usually what they're going to go for, and it's just that for me personally, it just hasn't clicked. So that's my highest regard for that, and it's shaped a lot of my opinions for what I want to see in controllers going forward. So after that rant, I'll toss it over to Mike and be like, if you were designing your favorite controller, like where would you start? What's like your favorite base, as you've said before, and then just what would you want on it, and what would you remove from it?
So, okay. So I'm like designing my own controller. I would pretty much, you know, I'd pretty much leave them how they are, like how the DualShock 4 is, or I don't think it needs like a touch pad on it or anything. Like I'd pretty much leave it the way that it is. Like I don't think for me personally, like I can't justify spending $250 on a controller. So for me, like that's where that differs. Like there isn't like I'm trying to think like of like a feature that's missing that that I want.
Well, think about like the form. Like you said, you would leave the DualShock 4. Is that because you prefer the symmetrical analog sticks, or do you like them offset, like the Pro, like those kind of things? Like, do you like the would you rather have the buttons in the center? Well, I mean, would you even call them start and select? Like, I think it's silly that the Xbox Series controllers now, what are they supposed to be, like options and menu, or view and menu? Like, I don't know what the little icons on their start and select buttons are supposed to mean. Like, I don't even know what I would tell. I think I saw that with the one with the little squares is supposed to be view, and the one with the like hamburger lines is supposed to be options. So I think like they have official names, but like nobody knows that. So I mean, I think, Mike, if you're like designing your own controller, you really got to get specific about those type of things. I mean, I'll go on my turn, but I mean, isn't there a little bit more that you like about the DualShock 4, the Xbox One controller?
I don't know. It works for the games I play. I'm not really like I haven't really I don't really think there is something that I could add to the controller.
Okay.
I mean, they've done stuff before with like phones and stuff where you can like remove portions of the phone, like attachments and stuff, and like maybe they could do something like that where you're like breaking stuff off and like customizing it, even like Ryan was talking about with his controller, how like he's able to remove like the D-pads and like stuff like that. If you could just like put stuff in different places or like move stuff around by like detaching, and I don't know.
So on that note, quickly, there's few, but there has been a few of those elite style controllers where you can actually switch the left analog stick and the D-pad position. I remember it was like MLG
Cool.
branded. So there's like one or two controllers that I've seen that can do that. And the Raiju can't do that. It can't switch the positions of the sticks, and that's because it's platform exclusive. You'd have to get the Xbox version, and there is an Xbox version where the sticks would be different, but you could still swap the D-pad, I'm pretty sure. So, um, I do kind of agree with that, although there is a balance between reliability because the more moving parts and replaceable stuff, and probably the more likely it is that they have to make them cheap and possibly replaceable. But I saw this on a YouTube video, and I thought it was a good opinion. was that, especially with the fact that these companies don't seem to want to use slightly more expensive parts for like with specifically the analog sticks for the drift issues. If these parts are going to wear down so fast over the period of time, why not design controllers to just simply be more user repairable? So that way we can just buy the parts, replace our replace them when they break down, instead of having to always rely on the warranty or just buying brand new ones for super expensive prices. Like it kind of sucks that one part breaks and the whole thing's useless.
Well, we know why they don't do that, but
Right.
that
We
would
know
be optimal. That would be optimal.
They want us to rebuy it, but it's not a good user experience. And
It's not a good user experience. It's not good for the environment to be throwing away all these
yep,
electronics.
good point.
Like it's not good for anyone except the companies.
So yeah, I looked up the Xbox buttons, and the menu button is the options button, and then the secondary, formerly the start button. Then the formerly select button is now on Xbox the view button, and it's the two little things there. The Xbox did add the share button now that's in the middle of it between the two. So Xbox did jump onto that because they like that. Although I guess I'm just being picky when I say I have a problem with the share button, because like why don't you already have the console button, the Xbox button or the PlayStation button. I like the idea of them just being an extra command, like you holding it or double tapping it, and that's just the share function or something like that, and let it be universal instead of making an entire extra button for that.
But I mean, you want quick access to it, so if there's a moment you want to record or capture, you don't miss it.
I
But
just don't.
I guess the way share works on PlayStation is it is recording like a window, and you just hit it, and you're able to
Yeah,
edit what just happened. So,
and that's a
yeah,
setting you can put in the menu as well, because if you don't want that doing,
yeah,
because it has to save some stuff in the background. Um, but yeah, I'm just saying, like, I don't think it's any more inconvenient to double tap a button than it is to have a dedicated button for it, because I'm more about like letting buttons be customizable. And while I don't change them around too much, I try not to customize my buttons more because things are so. I don't want to be switching around too much. I like things to be pretty similar. I'd rather have some more standardization, um, and then make it easier, because not every game even lets you switch buttons around, and not all the systems. I think Microsoft's gotten a bit better about like having a universal system level recustomization of the controller buttons, and obviously on PC it has tons of that. You can do complete rebindings because that's just the nature of the platform. Um, but yeah, I wish we could get those undersided buttons and the middle shoulder buttons standardized on non-third-party controllers. That's really the feature I want. That and gyro. I actually like the gyro motion control, and I'm glad that it's in the Joy-Cons, it's in the Switch Pro controller, it's in DualShock 4. It was the 6-axis started for PlayStation with it, but it was really bad. Like the sensors, the tech wasn't there yet. The DualShock 4 was a bit better, but it was still rough. A lot better in the DualShock 5, DualSense, the PlayStation 5 controller. And Microsoft has just not put in gyro. At first, I wasn't really sure why you'd do it, but then after a friend had me play through Doom 2016 on PC with the Steam controller and said use your gyro assist plus the touchpad, and I will get a little bit more into the Steam controller in a minute. But that I think the gyro feature is actually really useful, and I've used it on Splatoon 2 with the Pro controller, and being able to use the gyro to just do like subtle adjustments and complement with the stick is, I think, better than just using the right analog stick, and it's getting closer to the precision we all had when we were using the Wii remote as a pointer on the screen.
yeah. But why did Nintendo even have to get rid of the bar? Like they could have put an IR sensor on the Switch, and like I still think the sensor bar with the gyro in the Wii is a more comprehensive and better solution than like just the gyro, because the limitations of the gyroscope is that it does over time drift, like it loses its position, like you have to be able to recenter it, and that's basically what the sensor bar did. Is it had a fixed point of reference that the Wii could use to counteract the natural drift of a gyroscope and accelerometer. So I almost wish that, well, not almost, I do wish that with the Switch, they hadn't abandoned the idea of the sensor bar because I think it served a purpose that is missing with the Joy Cons.
Personally, I think the Move controller has the best motion because it has the camera to
What?
sense where you're. The Move controller, the for
Okay.
PSVR, yeah, I think that has like the best motion and best like sensing because you've got the actual literal camera there. And I was playing, what was it, Beat Saber the other night, and it seemed like very accurate to what I was doing, like where I was moving and like what I was doing. It just seemed to recognize everything
Well,
pretty easily.
the Move controller functions very similarly to the Wii Remote because of the fixed point of reference using the camera. It was using slightly more advanced tech, so that's why it
Yeah,
would feel a bit better. But at the same time, the Wii Remote's rudimentary tech was just about as precise. It had weird like bounding box issues, and so with games and stuff, they need to put in settings to help better control that. But when it was just like pointing at the screen, like the precision was there. Although
but sometimes it would like randomly like reset and like do weird stuff.
sometimes, not that often. Or are you talking about the Move controller or the Wii Remote?
The Wii remote would sometimes like just randomly like go off screen, or like if it was too sunny outside, then it would just like not work right.
Well, that's because it was infrared. So yeah, like
Yeah.
that's another thing is the sensor bar was just two infrared lights, and that it was literally just connecting to the Wii's power source. So
I just think the Move is the best motion controller that we have.
mm, I don't know about that. I think a mouse is the best motion controller we have, and that doesn't need a fixed point of reference. So I haven't used the Move controller much, but I know its tech was still kind of antiquated and requires a little extra bit. And that's the whole thing. The sensor bar is still an extra piece. So if we're trying to get it there, the gyro sensing tech is getting a lot better. On my LG OLED TV, its Magic Remote uses just gyroscope, and it's pretty darn good. Sure, I can recenter it a bit here and there, but on the responsiveness and the accuracy overall was pretty good, other than when it's like you're trying to draw it off the screen because it knows that you're moving the controller and that you're pointing it. It just doesn't have a reference point for like the edges of the screen, other than the cursor won't go off the screen. So you can drag and quickly reposition, or I think there's a hot command for recentering it in relation to that. And then the Joy-Cons function on a very similar thing. Now the Joy-Con tech might be a little cheaper even than what's in the Magic Remote, which is hard to imagine the Magic Remote being any more expensive than the Joy-Con tech. But having one less extra piece with a console that's especially meant to be partially portable, that's why they don't they're getting away from the sensor bar.
Well,
Is
I
it
might
when
be
it's-
wrong. I might be wrong. I really hope the Metroid Prime trilogy comes to Switch because I hope they try to do the motion controls because I'd really like the opportunity to compare the tech and be proven wrong that the Joy-Con technology is that much more advanced that it doesn't need the sensor bar.
The tech could still get better. Like they still can get better at sensitivity and detecting, and maybe they'll figure out some other ways to create those reference points that'll make it less likely to drift off and whatnot. There's
Yeah.
also wireless connectivity, which always is its own failure point and has to exist, and that's separate
Mhm.
from just the gyro sensors. That's where like using a pro style controller or twin stick style controller, and then using the right analog stick as your main movement, and then just kind of tweaking it using motion, I feel is like
The only place I've used that has been in Breath of the Wild, like when you're aiming, and Mario Tennis Aces also does that when you're aiming like a zone shot or a power shot. And I don't like it in either of those. I don't like having to tilt my controller to aim. So it's to me that, maybe I need to try it in a different game, but I've not liked that solution. So
there is also an adjustment period because you're like
yeah.
it's something you're not used to. Like I said, I played through an entire fast-paced game using it. Also, the
Mhm.
gyro sensors may not be that great. The game could also be not programmed that well to use the gyro sensor property. There's all these other
Yeah.
things we don't know because that sucks that it would be like a bad experience when it's not actually the sensor, it's just the game was programmed to not detect it the right way. There's no sensitivity settings for you to play with. Um, there's all these extra failure points that are just we're not 100% clear on. But I think in general, the gyro feature is good and does add value to a lot of games. There's tons of first-person shooters. There's tons of games where you have to move the camera with that, and I think the motion control is both intuitive and also it can be both complementary and supplementary to the experience. Whereas like I think the touchpad is something Sony can just abandon. I don't think it's really useful.
Well, they can't now because they're trying to make it backwards compatible. They're kind of stuck with it unless they want to break back. I guess you could always just use your old controller to play PS4 games.
You are cutting out a bit.
Yeah. Well,
Wait,
they can't.
let Mike go.
I was gonna say I have an idea for a future controller.
Let's hear it.
Instead of the touch screen like it is now, why not have like an actual screen, a little screen on the controller that you can is that too much with like the gamepad, the Wii U gamepad? Is that too much like that? Or I'm just talking about like a really tiny screen that you could use, have like a map on or something like that. How about something like that?
I don't disagree with you.
That's like back on like the GameCube with Crystal Chronicles, where you were using like a GBA as like an inventory.
Sorry,
Yeah.
you cut out again.
Oh, I don't know why that is.
I don't know. Yeah, it's just been sporadically happening. It's not consistent. But you were saying, just repeat what you were trying to say.
Well, Mike's idea of having screen on the controller, that reminds me of like on the GameCube when didn't they have like Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles where you had to use a Game Boy Advance as your inventory screen?
Mhm.
I mean, that if it's that small, I mean, I guess I don't know how useful a touchscreen the size of the touchpad on.
But that's like the DS. The DS didn't have like huge giant screen.
Yeah, but you were also using a stylus with the DS, so
So they could add a stylus.
No, but then you have to take your hands off buttons, and that disrupts
yeah.
your pace of play. Now, certain games could do that, so that's where like I don't disagree with the idea of having a second screen overall. It becomes a value proposition debate because if you add the screen, it needs to be big enough to be useful for multiple things, but also the screen does disrupt the flow of play because just like the touchpad, especially if you make it a touchscreen that you're supposed to interact with other than it just passively displaying information. Then the other part is it drains the battery more. And actually, let's get that.
It costs more. It costs more money.
It costs more, a lot more.
Well, you could have like a pop out, it pops out. You press a button and it pops out of the controller. And
that's even more expensive. That's even more expensive. So Mike
just wants the Wii U back.
Mike keeps designing a $500 controller and asking it to be $50. He keeps wanting them to just.
He's just unhappy of the news today that the PS5 has outsold the Wii U. He's just like, no, the Wii U was good, and I need everyone to know it.
It was a half-step measure.
It's the best, the best system ever.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about the Wii U gamepad.
That was a huge drop. We were you said you wanted to talk about the Wii U gamepad.
Yeah, that's a controller.
Right, it is a controller. But that's where I was kind of leading to this is like I wanted to also say like I thought of the Vita as a pretty darn good controller concept. Now it still needed to be ergonomically made to not be like just strictly a portable. Like it needed a second set of triggers. That back touch panel was completely useless.
Oh yeah, Tearaway used it.
It did, but that doesn't excuse that it's still kind of a rough concept. But yeah, it was close to being a full controller. And I wouldn't mind like the amount of options there as a controller. It just gets expensive. But the Switch now is the true evolution of what we're talking about here. And even the Wii U is just, or the Switch is just the Wii U in reverse. And I would say the Switch is what the Wii U wanted to be. It just, the tech wasn't there for them to do that. So I believe that with the Switch, and I'm pretty sure I said this on the podcast before, I think the Switch is like next iteration, and not talking like the upcoming Pro that would just be like a minor upgrade, like a true Switch sequel, their next generation Switch. They're gonna add wireless HDMI, so you can hold the Switch unit, and then you can wirelessly sync to your TV, and then the Switch itself will just be in your hands, and you can use the touchscreen and do all that, the Wii U stuff, and then just beam the signal out to your TV, and not need like a base. Maybe it still connects via a base, but That's what I think is the logical thing. And then Nintendo will have better Joy-Con tech, hopefully a better touchscreen as well. Like Ed, you and I have been talking about, like it needs to be more sensitive. It needs like an active digitizer. And or I don't know, is the digitizer in the screen or in the pen?
I think part of it is the pen is powered. Like the Apple Pencil, you have to charge it.
Yeah. Okay. But they could use. There's probably better capacitive touchscreens. They're probably not using the most responsive touchscreen they could use. So same thing. Like they could just improve the tech, and they always go with cheaper. So you just keep moving that bar up, even though that. So hopefully the next gen Switch will fill that in. It closes all those gaps. They have essentially achieved their goal of including like all the possible accessories. I know you don't feel it's as successful, Ed, but the Joy-Cons can function basically as the Wii remotes. As
They can that maybe after that they can port more Wii U games, but like we'll get the games ported a third time, but they'll actually be like when you played them on the Wii U.
Yeah.
Buy them all third. Maybe that's when we'll get the Legend of Zelda HD remasters, because they want to preserve the second screen functions that they built into them.
Yeah. So that's where like I think it needs to go that direction if you're really going to get that crazy with it. Otherwise, the basic controllers, I think we need to go with a kind of, and I know this sounds weird, kind of a less is more approach, because they shouldn't be that expensive to replace. They shouldn't be so crazy. And yes, there will be third-party controllers that are more or less expensive, but the basic one should have a certain standard of quality maintained and should be all the standard functions. And I think like adaptive triggers are neat. Well, we've heard some of the issues there, like if those break, suddenly they have no resistance. So that's worrying. You can turn off that stuff too if you don't want it, so hopefully that prevents some of the breaking. We'll have to see how they handle that in the future. Maybe they just have to do like a second generation controllers. Maybe that's something that's a new fad that, or not a fad, but a trend that we'll have to get used to, is these newer versions of controllers coming out mid-generation, because they tweak some features, they fix some old problems, and that becomes the new standard, and you're just expected to eventually buy those because they are a little more modular. You know, you can get a new controller and just use it with the system. But
yeah, one thing I'm surprised they haven't done with the Switch is like had different like control, like different attachments for like, you know, like a different controllers that you can attach to the side of the Switch.
I mean, they do, but they're third party.
Like, no, I mean official. Like Nintendo hasn't done like
a Pro Joy-Con.
Yeah, or anything. Like I'm surprised they haven't experimented with that more.
Yeah, not sure why.
Different colors. They have different colors.
That might have been like Iwata or Iwata's idea or something, and then now they're just like, you know, we don't do that.
My guess is just mitigating costs. It's cheaper to license out to the third parties and let them do whatever, and then Nintendo could go, well, that's not ours if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's like a way of just kind of excusing quality control. They're like, they're all third party. They can do whatever they want, and we just let them sell it for the Switch. So, who knows? It's probably something dumb like that. But yeah, it's good to have the one standard. I'm glad it's just like you have the one Pro controller and the standard Joy-Cons, but then you can get all the third party. It is disappointing though, like, and I really would love to know more information about why third party controllers, like why the third party Joy-Cons can't be used wirelessly. Is it literally?
Oh yeah.
I want to know if it's something Nintendo says, like you're not allowed to do this. Like even the Hori.
There are third party Joy-Cons. I know of at least one third party Joy-Con that works wirelessly. It's a cost issue. Remember those Binbach ones I sent to you?
Yeah, you're right. Some of them do.
Those ones are wireless, but I don't think they're very good quality. I don't think they're very good quality.
But those new is a Hori that makes like those big like Xbox style sized ones that attach, and those aren't wireless, but there's plenty of space for them. Just don't. I
think it would be a cost issue. It would probably cost as much or more than the regular ones if they included all the features.
Even not all the features, but just wireless. You know, like just let us use it as.
It would be nice.
It would be nice. So yeah, I wish I knew more information. It probably is mostly cost. I feel like also maybe Nintendo said that. Sorry, I was in the middle of saying, but what about the Hori D-pad Joy-Con, left Joy-Con. That's only allowed to be
Yeah.
used in wireless mode, and there's no reason. It's the same size as the regular Joy-Con. It's just got the D-pad instead of the 4 button separation.
Well, that's the right side, right?
Left side,
Left side.
D-pad,
Yes, the right.
left side.
Right.
Remember the Hori? Remember you have the Mario one?
Yeah, it's on the right side.
Left side.
It's on the left side.
No, it's on the right side.
It's
You're
not.
wrong. You're wrong.
I'm.
I don't know where you're confused, Mike.
Oh yeah, I'm confused.
No, it's you have your left analog stick and the D-pad are on
For
the
some
left.
reason, I thought the left already had a D-pad.
You're rather right.
The 4 button, yeah, you're right. The 4 buttons do have the like arrows on them, but it's
No, yeah, I thought there was like a D-pad on that already, and then I don't know. Sorry.
I do think Nintendo's like symmetrical gimmick there for the Joy-Cons being able to function as like separate controllers is neat. I think that's really creative, really innovative. But yeah, ultimately for comfort, it also was looking to see if there was just like a cap or something I could put on it so it just feels like a D-pad, but no one really makes that. It's all like shell mods or replacement pieces instead of just like a piece I could just fit on top of the 4 buttons. But I guess that has to do with like because the buttons like press into the shell and things like that. I don't know. That'd be a nice thing that they could do is make it so there's like a cutout so you could actually put a D-pad piece over it and then you don't need to buy whole new Joy-Cons. But I guess it's also getting back to the original problem. No idea why that Joy-Con with the D-pad can't be used wirelessly. It can only be used connected. Doesn't make sense. Don't get it. But who knows? Maybe I can Google around and see if I can find it. But they'll probably never say. It's probably some weird. It's probably just Nintendo being Nintendo. But you know what? That's not the way we want things to go. But we're not going to stop you from selling it. We're just not going to let it be fully useful, so fewer people want to buy it. I feel like it's just
I don't know,
repulsion.
I think it is. I was going to say,
Repulsion
I
by
think
frustration.
it's kind of like what Ed was saying about the cost. I think it's more of a cost
But it's
issue.
just one part. That doesn't change the cost. It's the same size and everything.
You don't think that the cost would significantly rise from adding a wireless chip to it?
Oh, that part. I hope not.
I don't know.
That seems so weird. But even then, like, sell it. People would buy it for like $50 to $60. People would.
Yeah, that's true.
It's stupid. It shouldn't be, but they would.
Yeah.
Especially for that functionality, because I'm sure a lot of people would like to use it, just not to use it while their Switch is docked.
We need like an inside source to like come on and like tell us,
Yeah.
someone who works in the like controller plant or whatever.
Something or Nintendo's R&D engineering department or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, I wish there was people out there willing to talk about that stuff. But maybe there is some people out there that have the information. I'd have to go digging. Some of that stuff seems dumb that they don't do that for third-party accessories, especially. Or like there's premium third-party accessories. Like I said, I bought a $200 controller. They make 200. They make 100. 80, 100, $200 controllers. There's no reason we couldn't get like these full-featured ones. And even if like you guys wouldn't want to, there's people like me who are crazy who would be willing to pay premium for a controller that had all the standards plus a little bit more, or just things the right way, or the way I prefer, in order to have that and not have to think about the controller not being ideal.
Does does the Kinect count as a controller?
Sorta, it does, yeah.
Where you are the controller?
Yeah, it is a motion camera thing. Once again, that's just to quickly talk about that, because then I should talk about the Steam controller a little bit. These unorthodox controllers is like, I really appreciated that Microsoft tried to make the Kinect standard with the Xbox One, and I thought it was such a disappointing thing when they stopped bundling it with it. Now I get why. I understand all the reasons. I get it's mostly cost, no one was using it, etc. But that's the thing, like either you do it or you don't, because no one's gonna use it if you don't have it standard. But then once they got rid of it because they needed to make the system cheaper and all that, and took it out. I'm like, should have seen that coming. There was no reason to even do it in the first place. But getting rid of it, like, there's no way for you to innovate that if you don't have it there standard. But yeah, people didn't want to support it, and then eventually it was just a waste of money for them. So that tech was undercooked for the most part, and it's getting better. There's third-party stuff, but it's just not where it needs to be yet. But that, like you're saying, with like the camera, and to Mike's point about the PlayStation Move, using the camera input to help associate some of that motion tech could help, and just using the camera might be the solution you're looking for. But that would also mean like there always has to be a camera in the room, and there are people who aren't comfortable with that idea either.
Yeah, and I think without the VR, I think Move pretty much would have gone away. I mean, besides people that like to play like Dance Dance Revolution or something like that, I feel like that probably would have.
You mean Just Dance?
Is that yeah?
Dance Dance Revolution is the one where you like you jump
pad.
The pad on the floor.
Okay. That's a controller too, right?
Yeah, the dance pad is the
Guitar Hero and Rock Band.
Yep, Guitar Hero controllers and stuff like that. Those are all
your iPhone as a controller.
Those are all neat novelty controllers. Oh, the phone control stuff. Not having the tactile feedback is so, I think, detrimental. It changes games so much, and I get that there's people who grow up with it and it's not the same, but I think we can all say from playing like mobile games and stuff like that, having to take up like screen real estate is already precious enough on the phone and on the TV. Like, you don't want to have to be looking at the controller a bunch. You want to be focused on what's going on there, and you build up your muscle memory and play so that way you don't even have to think about the buttons anymore. You just look at the screen and stuff's just happening. So that's with the touchscreen and stuff like that. For some games it makes a lot of sense, but in general it really bugs me whenever I'm putting my hand in front of the screen if it's not like, it doesn't feel intuitive.
I agree with that. I don't like using the iPhone as a controller, at least with like traditional buttons. I don't mind it if it's like actual, like if it's actually like if you're playing Tetris and you're actually like moving the blocks around, like that's different than like using the A and B button and D-pad virtually.
And when the buttons are physically there, you don't have to think about the positioning as much. You can focus more in the game. Whereas with the touchscreens, there's touchscreen only controls on like phones and mobile games. There's no consistency. Especially if they're trying to mimic like traditional controls, they can all be different. The only like cool innovation they had is like the dynamic analog sticks that they have, where like wherever you put your thumb and then slide from there creates the joystick. But still, even that, like, there's no fixed points. You could get your thumb in a weird position. You're gonna constantly have to readjust, or you have to pay attention to the icons around the screen to make sure you're not accidentally registering presses on other buttons from that. And people have different sized fingers and thumbs, so I feel that's a lot messy unless it's like really designed with what I would call like true touchscreen philosophy. But when they just try to mimic like traditional controller controls on touchscreen, it kind of falls apart as now until we get better with until they can do like the dynamic button tech that they're trying to work on, where like screens like maybe get some physical stuff popping out of them for that to work.
That's crazy.
Yeah, they're working on that stuff. We'll see if that comes around. That'd be pretty cool. Some of the haptic feedback stuff feels really cool, but it's not quite there yet, and I don't think like being able to tell when your thumb has slid onto another button without taking your finger off the screen, we're just not quite there yet. But we'll see. I'm open to my mind being changed, but for right now, it feels like trash.
Yeah, there's like been rumors that Apple is gonna make like a MacBook with the big touch screen for the keyboard, and that just sounds awful. I can't imagine they'd actually do that, but like, I mean, maybe there will be a day when the touchscreen will have enough like haptics and really like meaningful feedback where you don't need physical buttons and you're just typing on a touchscreen or you're just playing on a touchscreen. But I can't imagine what that would feel like, where it would be better than a dedicated buttons.
It will like zap you every time you like.
Yeah.
Every time.
every time you type the wrong key, and that's how kids will learn how to type.
That was a huge drop. Every time you tap a key, what?
It'll zap you. So that's how kids will learn how to type.
Okay. Yeah, I think that just has to be a new technology where screens are made with a new material that can dynamically form into physical, semi-physical thing, raise up or whatnot. So we'll see. I'm pretty sure they're working on that stuff. I haven't ever had a chance to put my hands on something like that or really see it in motion, but I believe they're working on it, and I think it's probably going to be possible at some point. It's just going to be new tech, and then hopefully it's durable enough for people to go ham on it because that has to be some sort of weird material. So
DK bongos.
oh man, yeah, people are crazy. Like, props to all those people that use the weird gimmicky controllers to play traditional games, but you're
Yeah,
crazy, man.
You could do a platform with that. Those
So
bongos.
yeah, we're getting close.
Playing Dark Souls on a banana.
Yeah, we're getting close to time here, so I'll finally talk about the Steam controller a bit because I think it's worth mentioning that. It did something really big that I think is worth talking about and worth considering for the future of video game controllers, standard video game controllers. The Steam controller's ergonomics I didn't think were the greatest. Its bumpers were too stiff, its triggers were too short throw and shaped a little weird. The stick resistance felt off. The face buttons to me felt too stiff as well. Like, so yes, a whole bunch of weird, odd, don't know how you didn't get this feel right on there. But Valve's got enough money that they could experiment. So that's the only thing I've been disappointed in, is that Valve didn't keep like going and iterating. I get that they're like, well, we're gonna put stuff out there and we hope people customize it, but no one really did. No one really, no third parties really tried making their own version of the Steam controller, which was unfortunate. But I do think them experimenting with the two haptic touchpads was actually really cool. I didn't like the D-pad being fully gone. I wish they would have kind of done the inverse of what they did, where they did an etch, where the up, down, left, and right, the cross of the D-pad was inset instead of raised up. So I would have preferred that sort of thing, or maybe a different type of cut for, instead of doing that like cross cut into it, doing like the 4 raised zones with a little bit of like texture. And they weren't completely like smooth or something. They were like soft textured. I don't know how to describe it, but like there was a texture to it. I think that replacing the right analog stick eventually with a touchpad makes a lot of sense. Or evolving the right analog stick in some way to involve touch capacitive to allow for much more finer controls to it. I think that's the future of like the right analog stick, in my opinion. For the left side, they still had a joystick, which makes sense. You want to have some sort of that, and different input types on the controller, because that's what the whole thing is. It's an input device. It should have a bunch of different options because it's going to make sense for different things. I'm glad the DualSense has a microphone now. I don't really use it. I'm upset that it's always on, but I think it's good to have it as an option just built into the controller for either using it with games for weird things or voice commands, or for chatting with your friends if you don't want to wear a headset, or your headset's broken and you don't have it or something like that. They also do a weird thing where if you're doing the voice chat, it only comes through the speaker. You can't set it through the TV, or at least I haven't figured out how to do that. It's all weird things that I'm sure they'll fix with firmware updates eventually, but that's just a quirk. But I'm happy the microphone's there. I even thought like going back to the Vita, them having a camera on there, the camera, like being able to do like detection stuff with a camera, front-facing camera, is great. I think all of that could be there and built into controllers. It does make it more expensive, but like the right Joy-Con has the weird IR sensor on the bottom that's like nobody uses. But having certain things in there that could be used for a bunch of different types of commands, or substitutes for different types of commands, I think is fine. I think that principle idea is fine. And the tech is cheaper. Cameras get there. It's more than software, and you just need a camera capable of detecting those things. But going back to the touchpad, I think that's great. I also feel like, and I know I'm called crazy for this, I think the analog slider pad that was on the 3DS was great. I think it had the wrong texture. My thumb was constantly slipping off it. So if they had made it with a different type of texture or like a better ridge or something, so my thumb wasn't like falling out of it every single time. And I don't really have sweaty hands, so it wasn't even that. Like I do sometimes have oily hands, but I do wash my hands a lot. Like it's not, I really don't touch my electronics if my hands are dirty. it just naturally, using it, it was smooth and soft rubber, and then my thumb would just slide off a whole ton. But I think if a few adjustments there, slider pad being flat and having a little more travel distance, it could be just as accurate as that. And I think somewhere between maybe the thumbstick being touch sensitive, that could eventually evolve the right analog stick. Could be completely wrong, but that's what I'd love to see experimented with is that concept of the capacitive pad plus the haptic feedback could eventually be the evolution of like the right side of our controller again, and more precise camera controls. That plus gyro. So I think the Steam controller was a worthwhile experiment. There seems to be rumors of a second patent for an enhanced or a new Steam controller too. I think Valve takes their sweet time with stuff. They did the same thing with like the Index and the VR headsets. So I think it's inevitable that we'll get a Steam controller too. They're probably just really tweaking it and trying to get it right. Which
What
concern
about the Epic game controller?
I don't want to even entertain your idea, Mike.
Sorry, go ahead.
That'd be funny. That'd be funny. I mean, once again, that's another company with infinite money that if they wanted to, they could. But I don't think they care about that. They haven't shown that they care about that. That'd be interesting.
I think they probably would eventually, maybe.
I don't know. They have the money to do it if they wanted to, but I've seen nothing that leans towards them eventually doing that.
Games on the Epic Game Store will only work with the Epic Game Store controller.
And then you have to pay extra if you wanted to use a third party. Tencent would make them do that. I'm rubbing my face in pain, listeners, because I don't want to talk about Epic Game Store right now.
Maybe that's a good way to end the podcast. Just end it in a sour note.
I don't want to leave it there. Controllers are cool. I really hope. It is awesome though. The dongles, like you can get those adapters, so you can use multiple different party controllers on different consoles. I haven't bitten the bullet on one, and I think I'd definitely wait for one that'd be compatible with the PlayStation 5 and some of the other controllers I use. But that is cool that exists and can work. As I mentioned on our Genie episode, one of my possible wishes would be controllers just work across all platforms. It just seems really silly that, considering how similar they are, that they're still so separated. But
we need one controller to rule them all.
I'm not even asking for just one controller to rule them all, but like allowing you to use whatever controller instead of having to constantly buy separate controllers for each platform and be able to just use your favorite across everything. PC at least lets you do that really good. Microsoft was really nice about finally letting all the firmware for all the different controllers on there. Steam does really good.
Nintendo would never do that.
They would never, but that's why like other platforms could. I could see Microsoft even being like, hey, you know what? We got native support, or at least we're not going to stop you from bringing those controllers over, and like letting developers put firmware support on there. Because that's another thing. Like I that was really cool for, once again, fighting game related, was with like arcade stick support and stuff like that. You can have games can specifically have firmware to recognize the different types of controllers. I think it was Skullgirls that like added firmware to on like PS3 and PS4 or something like that. But it had custom firmware to allow for recognizing the different controllers. And they do have to have certain controller firmware in order to do like the button recognition for like mapping buttons properly and stuff. So by a piece of software basis, that's really cool. And I'd hope that could continue on eventually as maybe they lift restrictions like that, but I'm sure that's part of the rules. You're not allowed to include like additional firmware for weird controllers because it could be an avenue for I say piracy, my mind immediately goes to piracy because it's a stupid thing that all the companies want to try and prevent. But it could also be an avenue for other like hacking and things like that maybe they're trying to close up security holes and gaps on. But not a programmer, not 100% sure, but wouldn't be surprised if that's something. People are really clever. People are really smart and can come up with really devious things. So
yeah, it's like you put in the Konami code in your controller and it was custom firmware.
Yeah, it just lets you download everything from the eShop immediately. So that'd be cool. It makes Nintendo Online free for everyone. That'd be great. Someone just puts in a custom controller. That's right. Let's end on like two more questions here that I was gonna say. First off, batteries. I think we all agree Sony's battery life in their controllers is trash. It's impressive that Nintendo gets so much battery life out of the Joy-Cons and the Pro controller. Now, are we in agreement that it should just be the Xbox route where it's like you can use traditional batteries or you can get like a rechargeable pack? Think
Yes, I think
user
that's
replaceable
better.
batteries? Yeah.
Yes.
As long as you can get a rechargeable pack, or like even if it would come with a rechargeable pack, that would be cool. Because like people, when they get their system, they just want to play it. So if it came with a rechargeable pack, but it's like, hey, you could just replace this with AA batteries if you want. Like, I think that would be the best option.
Yeah, I agree. I think Microsoft does offer like you can buy the first party rechargeable battery and you can pop it into the battery slot as well as I think there's like a controller bundle you can get where you get the controller plus that. But that would be nice if Microsoft just went, you know what? It's still going to be a user replaceable battery, but we will include the rechargeable one by default, and then you can use like AA's if you want, and rechargeable AA's. So yeah, I agree. I would like to see that. I think Sony and Nintendo should both let batteries be user replaceable. I understand that it can also be like a quality concern. I thought wasn't there something, a tech device that like the battery was part of the reason that people were able to like hack into the firmware or something? Does that sound
The
familiar?
PSP. Remember the Pandora batteries for the PSP?
Yeah, what? Okay, yeah, I do remember that. Why? Why did the battery affect that at all?
I have no idea, but I remember buying a battery on eBay, PSP, and then like never paying for games again. So
Sorry,
you know,
you had to cut out there. You bought a Pandora battery and
and I hacked my PSP, and I don't think I ever paid for another game after that. So that was back
okay.
in college when I was into all that. But
Yeah, I have no idea why that battery would. What that seems also like a weird programming thing that Sony was like, well, this is for security, and then they realized that's a stupid idea.
yeah,
Just
Yeah,
like
like how are you going to be able to play the PS4 in 20 years? Like if you can't replace the batteries and the
oh,
controllers.
or well, they can always work wired. They'll still work wired. That'll always be true. But yeah, the batteries for convenience. Though that is another news story. Quickly, it's not controller related, but battery related. That PS4s and PS4 Pros apparently have an internal clock battery. That if it that right now, if the firmware detects that the battery's dead, it can't check its internal clock against the PSN, and therefore it will eventually break your console and just make all software, including disk reading, like inoperable. Hopefully they fix that with a firmware update, but if they don't, that like part of me thinks that they're not going to because they want to just move everyone off of PlayStation 4 onto PS5 when they can. But I hope they extend the warranty or do for specifically for like that kind of repair, or they do a firmware update where eventually it's like it doesn't have to check the internal clock and they just reroute the security. I have no faith that they'll do either
That's
of
so
that,
dumb.
but
that's why they said they believe in
short-sightedness.
That's why they said they believe in generations. Because they
Absolutely.
believe eventually your old consoles will stop working, so you have to buy the new one.
Yeah. Eventually they just don't want you using your old stuff anymore.
It's
They
just
want you
like
to move on.
anti-consumer.
It is anti-consumer. It really is short-sighted. It's really, really painful. I know some of it is quality control, like with the built-in batteries you can get for like phones. You can get smaller phones that can make sure that the battery is not like a third-party battery that's going to explode, even though proprietary the built-in batteries can still be flawed or whatnot, and there's those issues. But yeah, user replaceable I think is just way more valuable to us. So battery life in controllers needs to get better. Hopefully that's something that they'll do, um, and make it, especially when they force us to do that, because that's another thing. Like the rest of your controller works, and I guess you could just use it wired, but why even do that? Or like we were saying, like the Vita, I don't think you can open that to replace the battery. Luckily with the PSP, you could remove the battery before it explodes. I think the 3DS had it was one screw, but it had a user accessible panel, so you could do that. So even that, like just a user accessible panel where we can swap that and order a new battery from that, just let us do it. It's such a small thing. Um, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, I don't think I really care. I know Bluetooth isn't the best, but it is the most ubiquitous, and Microsoft continues to use a combination of the Bluetooth plus the Wi-Fi signal. Wi-Fi signals seem to be better, but they usually require like a dedicated dongle, which is an issue. Um, but who knows? Maybe there'll be a new wireless signal later on. It'll be all 5G, and then we won't have to worry about that at all. You guys have any other thoughts about controllers before we go?
And I hope controllers get more reliable. I'm tired of having to keep replacing controllers.
100% agree. Yeah, and hopefully like third parties also get better at making the controllers. But yeah, I think that's about it. That's pretty much all there. As I've mentioned with like the my big thing was like I just want better D-pads on the controllers. I don't know why it's so hard for them to make good controllers with mechanical buttons and D-pads. Memory, I think it's membrane. Membrane's cheaper, lasts longer. I think that's mainly it, but I don't know 100%. There's some interesting stuff out there about the components. Oh yeah, did I already mention like maybe making the joysticks like user swappable as well? That'd be cool, but yeah, they should just be more reliable in general. I think that's it. That's all for today, guys. Pretty good. Thank you,
Yeah.
listen. Oh,
I didn't think I was going to have this much to say about control, but there's a lot to talk about this subject.
if there's any major developments, we may revisit this topic in the future. Especially maybe we'll once we're able to hang out and like share controllers, maybe we'll come up with like a comprehensive list of our own of like these are the best controllers, or maybe that's what we'll do. We'll focus and see if we can't do a our ideal controller episode and maybe tack that on as like a little extra episode or something like that. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for being with us. Thank you, listeners, for joining us, and we hope you are well until the next time.
Bye.
Thank you.